So Blazevic is a theater and performance studies scholar as well as a dramaturge based in Zagreb, Croatia, where he teaches theory and history of theater and drama, performance studies and dramaturgy at the Academy of Drama Arts, as well as opera dramaturgy at the Music Academy, both at the University of Zagreb. Blazevic is also the head dramaturge of the Croatian National Theatre and artistic director of the opera company. In 2011, Blazevic was awarded the Fulbright Scholar postdoctoral grant to conduct a research project at Columbia University and at New York University titled Dramaturgy, Shifting Concept and Practice. Blazevic is the chair of Performance Studies International, PSI, committee since 2010 and co-founder of the new PSI working group on dramaturgy and performance studies. Performance Studies International, founded in 1997, is the most important organization internationally for the studies of performance and performing arts. In 2009, he ran the 15th Annual Conference of Performance Studies International, PSI 15, in Zagreb on the theme Miss Performance. And he conceived and now drives the 21st edition of the conference entitled Fluid States, Performances of Unknowing, which is currently taking place in 15 locations around the world. So we are extremely lucky to have him amongst us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Marin Blazevic.
Okay, a few more authors here.
Too.
Does anyone want to? You get those two.
Thank you.
So, thank you for this introduction, and thank you, Emilia and Nora, for inviting me to present my current stage of career, so to say, at Roski School of the Arts, which is of course not going to be about myself, but it's going to be about some of the projects that I've been involved with over the past 5 or 6 years. It is also going to be my first attempt to connect those 3, or we could talk about 4 projects actually, because the last 2 are closely interconnected. One is the Performance Studies International 2009 conference on Miss Performance. The other one is the project that you also mentioned, that Fluid States, Performances of Unknowing. And then what might sound or look as a contradiction to all that I've been working in the framework of performance studies is actually co-running the National Theatre, one of the 4 national theatres that we have in Croatia, and its opera company. But we'll see. I mean, that could also be a kind of genuine misperformance of my own life, trying to put those 2 sides of my interest in some kind of correlation. But we'll see how it will all end this year or in a couple of years. As it has been announced in the abstract that has been shared to you, I guess, the focus of this presentation will not be on the actual program of those projects, but rather building upon the concepts of shifting dramaturgy and misperformance that I have proposed and elaborated in the recent years, the later misperformance in collaboration with my colleague Vlada Feldman. I would rather draw your attention to the misperformative dimension and challenges of those projects. What makes misperformance the crux of their performance? How is it that a failure, an error, a miss can be turned with or without intention into a happy misperformative? So it is going to be something like 40-45 minutes long journey through all those projects. There's going to be some videos, some images, more or less disturbing, first less disturbing, then more disturbing as we are going to, as we will be approaching to the theater proper. We'll see. I'm also myself curious to see how that will work in the end. For the students among you, I will hold a seminar tomorrow when you will have a chance to ask me whatever you come up with now, and it's going to be a discussion, but also an opportunity to go deeper into some of the things that I will be talking about today. Okay, so we'll start with Performance Studies International Conference in 2009, which was on the theme of misperformance. So as I will be playing with a lot of videos, sometimes it might take a little bit more time, but that would be a good chance for you to have a drink of water, a glass of water or something like that. Okay. So the conference on misperformance was a kind of beginning of all that I will be talking about through this presentation. At one point you will see how it all started at the Misperformance Conference for the Fluid States Project, and how is it related, Global Fluid States Project, to the Misperformance Conference in 2009, and then also in what way the theory of misperformance somehow inspired also myself to think further and to go even further, and then to accept that challenge of running a theater, which, as I said, could sound to some as a contradiction to my involvement in performance studies. Mainsprings of Performance Studies International 15 Conference in Zagreb 2009 were the following questions. How to make the interaction and mutual reflection between performance, practice and theory of performance, artistic and scholarly research more creative and complex. How to encourage interplay between speculative and embodied, aesthetic and academic and activistic approaches to performance. How to stage their confrontations and conflations. Then, can we invert the representational situation of conference event, experiment with permutations in presentational relations among conference participants, and consequently reverse the conference function when collaborative performative research and exchange of ideas would outweigh a mere distribution and marketing of knowledge? Those initial challenges led to the introduction of the concept and enactment of the format of PSI 15 shifts, further developed for the Zagreb conference follow-up in Rijeka in 2010 and adopted by the PSI annual conferences in Toronto, Utrecht and Leeds as a regular format for irregular forms of conference activities. Shifts cannot be exclusively reduced to panels or working groups, group meetings, roundtable discussions, workshops or lectures, work-in-progress presentations, public forums, highly contingent interactive events, actions or installations, theatre, dance or performance art, multimedia performance exhibitions, seminars or interventions. Rather, the shifts were conceived as collaborative crossover format inviting both artists and scholars, activists and academics, teachers and curators, writers and performers to jointly experiment with and in between the functions and protocols of various intersected forms of performance, its research and reach. Tomorrow we'll have more chance to talk about the whole curatorial protocol, the curatorial procedure that was behind the program of shifts. Today we'll just have to theorize a little bit more about it, and I will then also show you some examples. Of course, shifts did not happen out of the blue within performance studies concept, but also performance studies history. There was a theory actually, or intent, an idea. At one point also it seemed as an ideology that led up to the shifts, but I think we could state now, after that many years that passed since the conference in Zagreb, but it was at that conference that we actually succeeded in bringing those two intentions, so those two challenges, theory on one side and practice on the other, at such intensity in the conference program. And as I said, conferences that followed adopted the concept of shifts. Then it disappeared, but we can talk about that later. So let me just glimpse at the nascent ideas and times of performance studies that led up to the concept of shifts. One of the key challenges in conceptualization, constitution and development of performance studies was, but I'm not sure whether it still is, the invitation to interaction and mutual reflection of practice and theory or criticism of artistic performance. Richard Checkman and Dwight Conkelgood, the initiators of performance studies, have insisted on the integration between studying performance and doing performance, on the need to accept and embrace a collaborative agenda intended to, I quote either Checkman or Conkelgood, refuse and supersede the division of labor between theory and practice, abstraction and embodiment, to consider performative practice as a supplement to, not substitute for, written scholarship. The issue at stake is a possible transformation of normative social arrangements. As Conkelgood stated, an ethics of reciprocity and exchange. Even expectation, according to Schechner, to act on or act against strictly ordered or settled hierarchies of ideas, organizations, or people. In the case, however, of Zagreb conference, there was another history that was perhaps even more influential in devising the shift as a format, and that is actually post-dramatic dramaturgy. Now, I have developed in other places, I think even in this book or another place that is on your reading list, the concept of shifting dramaturgy that I will be talking about today, but I related it also to the post-dramatic dramaturgy, which is a kind of a typical continental European concept. We won't have time now to go into it, but I just want to stress that it was not just the history of performance studies that is behind the concept of shifts, but also post-dramatic dramaturgy. Something to talk about tomorrow. However, what might be interesting to remind you is that one of the representative application or practice or shifts of post-dramatic dramaturgy can be found in the genre of performance essay, which is something which you students might have also heard about. Performance essay is not simply a lecture or paper presentation enriched with performative elements, nor staging of an essay, nor a performance theoretically framed by reading of essay. Interplay of performative practice and theory or criticism of artistic performance is normally just accompanying performance, theatrical representation included prior to or after its actual encounter with the spectator. Performance essay, however, when viewed as a shifting format, aspires for more. In the case of performance essay, the interplay entwines the overall performance sequence. So what I'd now like to do, just to provide a little break from just theory, is to play for you a short fragment from one of the shifts that we organized in Zagreb in collaboration with a local curatorial team. The title of that shift was The Orange Dog. And The Orange Dog is a piece by Laurie Anderson that probably Amelia would be able to tell you more than I could. But what's interesting about that shift is all that you will actually see in that video. We won't have time to look at the whole video, but let's take a couple of minutes just to see what it was and in what sense this shift that was titled Orange Dog could be represented, for example, for a performance essay. there will be sound. So it is interesting, and in a way, typically misperformative is that actually it was actors who enacting performance pieces from some of the most representative performance pieces from the history of performance art in Croatia. So why is there no sound?
I think your sound of your computer seemed to be on.
No, it's just that we were. Wait a second. It worked before.
You don't have your mute on, Nathan?
No,
I
I
don't
didn't
know.
mute it. It
The
worked
mic.
before. What's the problem?
Do you want me to get Catherine?
Huh? Is Catherine here?
She will.
No.
You said that.
Well,
Okay, the sound in this case really is important. So, but we tested it all.
and it's hooked up to the.
Yeah, it sure should work.
That should be turned up, and then.
No, this it simply did not react, but then I played it through this one.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's not
maybe
checking.
just like a little one or something.
You know, now it doesn't work, even though we tried before. And we played at opera, didn't we? And it was working.
Yeah. Does it that's the link? You know what? I see that the icon is. Would you click on that?
This one?
Yeah. Yeah, the
This
volume
one?
is turned down, so then turn it back
It
up.
doesn't react.
Oh, it's oh, the middle. May I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You had it turned up before, but
Yeah, I think that's it.
No.
Oh.
I know, you've seen it. My God. Okay, let me just check if it will work for the other thing, and
Yeah.
then we'll see what to do. This one should work now. Yeah, okay.
There we go.
Okay, are you okay now?
yeah.
Good. He's screaming, Zagreb, I love you. What didn't happen in 2000, in early 70s is what happened in 2009. He was actually arrested. And this is the original artist performance, Tom Gottowitz. Sanja Vekovic, she just recently had an exhibition at MoMA. in New York. but we could look more at it tomorrow. You know how this will end, right? She's not going to be baked. There is one I would like to see. This one. So shooting.
This is the one.
Okay, have to move on. In order to shift the shifts towards misperformance and incorporate the conference theme in the conference event, to experiment with transformation of misperformance from its metaphorical virtuality and local historical realities into conference's actuality, hence a constant threat to its efficacy, a complex and dynamic dramaturgical strategy had to be designed and tested. While programming the shifts, it became inevitable at some point to exceed the initially set time and space frames. Because of the overwhelming number of inventive and otherwise relevant shift proposals, the program started to grow. In the end, there were 34 instead of planned 16 shifts, 64 instead of planned 27 shift sessions, taking place in 12 performance spaces in 5 different venues in not more than 4 evenings or nights. One shift swamped every free niche of the local culture center courtyard, while another one occupied the whole building and transformed it into a school for a day. That was the school of Sisyphus that you have seen the image in the beginning. All that exuberant simultaneity of manifold events was pushing the shifts program to the extreme limit of viability in terms of both production and reception. At that point, the conference started to fall apart, and it revealed its character in the most vivid way, when being more involved with the misperformance of the conference than the conference on misperformance. It is the abundance, the loose structure, rambling growth, the crisscrossed schedule and broken rhythm, heterogeneous spatial arrangements and parallel temporal flows, therefore the impossibility to see more than only some segments of the shifts program that were enabling willing conference participants to engage with shifts by experimenting with the shifting dramaturgy. It is a dramaturgical activity that is, after assuming responsibility for decisions about moving through, doing in and going out of the particular situation, actually venturing upon an action that would not be motivated by the need or demand for rightful procedure, reaction, direction, relation or position. Positions, relations, directions, reactions and procedures, failure included, are there only to be recurrently exposed to critical reflection, tested, altered, abandoned or transformed, dismissed and replaced. Performing her own dramaturgy of PSI 15 shifts, moving through the sometimes planned, other times accidentally shifting program, the conference participants had numerous directions at their disposal. None of them, however, promised synthesis and the sense of completion, but rather a suspense about the outcome. Almost all shifts, being, after all, a conference format, were events open to join or leave at any time without a feeling of unease. A kind of hop-on, hop-off attendance might have converted your performance at and off the conference into nothing more than a marketing or at least a tourism opportunity, seeing sights and buying performance arts theory and practice goods, unless you decided to spare no effort for turning your journey through the shifts, fragmented times and spaces into a creative process, and turning paths you took into chances to improvise with dramaturgical procedures of relating and correlating, assembling and disassembling, structuring and restructuring, doing and undoing, performing and misperforming. In other words, the whole process might have taken you somewhere or frustratingly leave you nowhere, end up as a more or less delightful performance or potentially both playful and disturbing misperformance. PSI 15 conceptualized the shifts program as a dramaturgical installation, multiple time and space for the experiments with shifting attention, expectation, choices, strategies, directions, experiences, discourses, responsiveness, with lost and gained time, inaccessible and found spaces, missed and discovered traces, aleatoric sequences and harmonized relations, impossible, temporary, and broken connections, conflict and disintegrated situations, eventually into shifting shifts, as one of the PSI 15 shifts was named. What I plan to do at this point is to actually perform a kind of shifting dramaturgy for you, just by showing you fragments of several shifts that you could actually, it's actually something that wouldn't take us too much time because we already lost some time trying to fix the sound. But this is what you can get in case that you still can find or purchase the performance research issue on this performance. And included in that issue of the journal, Performance Research, there is a DVD on shifts. And in that DVD, we created this grid, which represents almost all of the shifts that were part of that conference, and enables you to take your own shifting dramaturgical journey through the conference. Under each of those boxes is one of the shifts presented with a text, with some images, and most of them also with a video. So basically, you just click, and then it opens, and then you check what happened at that event. It just takes too much time now to go through all of it. Maybe we could just try, but then, yeah, while I'm talking, I could just play for you. That should be enough. Play for you when it opens. What happened at the School of Sisyphus shift? There won't be any sound, but images will help. Okay. So let's go back for a moment to one of the defining shifts in the formation of the performance studies paradigm, emphasized already in the beginning of this presentation, and it epitomized, for example, in Dwight Concogood's conclusion on the collaborative agenda that should overcome the difference between thinking and doing, interpreting and making, conceptualizing and creativity. Our radical move, I quote Concogood, is to turn and return insistently to the crossroads. If the PSI 15 theme could be characterized as an inversion of the performance studies object of study, misperformance being a continuous and constituent threat in the unfolding of every performance, should we then think of the shifts as nothing more than a new version of the crossroad? So for you to understand, it's especially in the School of Sisyphus, those people that are performing are actually mainly scholars and academics that were put in a situation when they're also supposed to perform whatever was their task. School of Sisyphus was, I can say that after how many years? It's 6 years. It was really one of my favorite. Well, this moment is when a little boy is teaching participants at a conference Croatian language. So of course we didn't have a proper teacher, but in a very misperformative way, we actually asked the boy to teach them Croatian. Could we speculate about a shifting dramaturgy as a kind of perverted rite of passage, which is keeping its participants in potentially permanent liminality, or should we perhaps say fluidity? This is already a hint for the fluid states. Transition without direction, betwixt and between, position without resolution, since every such outcome would mean at least a temporary end of shifting in the interest of normative performing. A rite of passage which, at least conceptually, should miss to past, at least until it's arbitrarily cut. Is this the examination shift? There's David Cross, there's Richard Goff. We all were supposed to take an exam before we entered the School of Sisyphus. It lasted the whole day. It started with joint collaborative development of the curriculum, and ended up late in the night around 1 or 2 a.m. with bottles of whiskey and other liquors, as every proper school should end up with. That's what I didn't say. Cut that from the recording. So if PSI 15 and the dramaturgy of the Shifts program really did afford yet another opportunity for transgression of roles and crossing of territorial bounds, for practice of the ethics of reciprocity and exchange, rehearsal and rethinking of social relations beyond hierarchical power arrangements, the question still remains: where has all that liminal activity between art and criticism, academy and activism, theory and practice taken us? There was a lady, just an ordinary lady from Zagreb, who actually presented some of her recipes to the scholars that gathered at the conference. Okay. Misperforming lurks in the wings of every performance as its defining, therefore constitutive, in the sub and perversion. When misperforming becomes constituent rather than contingent to a social situation, be it a theatrical representation, conceptual performance, participatory community art event, tourist tour, dinner, or a conference opening or after party, then its relevance is not measured by the pragmatics of success, but recurring alertness of the skeptical and self-critical mind. Oh, this was Richard Goff. Richard Goff is one of the key persons in the development of performance studies. He is the editor-in-chief of performance research, and he had his own examination protocols for all of them, or for all of us who want to take part in that program. Just mind you that Performance Studies International has annual conference still every year, except for this one, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. And this was actually, and it used to be before that, except for some attempts in Copenhagen and some other places, mainly an academic conference. So we shifted that idea of academic conference, and even though we had also paper presentations and panels, but the main program was the program of shifts. So he was taken to the provost, and there was a provost. He had a bottle of alcohol in the wardrobe, and then at one point you probably won't be able to see it, but a lady just jumped out from the wardrobe, and it was all conceived, planned, and rehearsed, mainly on that day. But we can talk more tomorrow about the curatorial side of this project. Misperformance employs shifting dramaturgy as a constantly self-reflecting and reviving strategy that further complicates and possibly overcomes paradoxical coupling of liminality and normativity in the domain of culture performance. It is not just embracing failure, enhancing the irony of the negative efficacy, or intensifying resistant social and political force of the liminal act, action, acting, and activism. It means and does all that, but also this. Instead of maintaining the canon of one's experimental and alternative performance, it will not hesitate turning normative practices, for instance, theatrical illusion, dramatic acting, and even operatic singing, into now liminal experiences, and then shift the corporeal and discursive performances forward or again backward. It will opt for misfelt fail, when failure misses to fool and foil its misperformative pragmatics, it will keep again shifting shifts, always on the edge, but never for the end of performance. Now, the whole concept of shifts and shifting dramaturgy was instrumental also in devising, first of all, thinking about and strategizing another project that I've been involved with ever since 2011, which is the Fluid States Performances of Unknowing conference. Some of you already said a few words about that, and let's see what's there. Okay, so. Okay, here you can see Amelia Jones.
Actually, that's not me.
That's not you?
That's Sylvie Tourangeau.
Then this is you, definitely.
That's fun.
Where's the image? This is you. Okay.
Yeah.
So, since Performance Studies International was founded in 1997, its conferences have tended to take place in North America and Western Europe, with the exception of conferences in New Zealand 2003, Singapore 24, and Croatia 2009. Since then, there have been a couple of other conferences outside of the, as it is called, the US and UK nest. For example, the conference in Shanghai. But at the time when we started to work on the project Fluid States Performances of Unknown, that was the case. We're talking about 2011, 2012. Being international, however, involves an understanding of performance research as a diversity of approaches that can be tracked back to various practices in many different locations and contexts. A crucial question is how to engage with such a multiplicity of perspectives and sites of contestation. Clearly, the conference in Zagreb and in that region, which is the former Yugoslavia and which is the East, which was the first conference which was the first annual PSI conference in Eastern Europe, made it obvious to all of us that were at that time part of the Performance Studies International community that something has to be changed. Clearly, there are distinct, well-developed histories, even cultures, traditions, and school of performance research that are not necessarily called performance studies, but that are being developed in those different communities, different cultures. And that was actually when we started to think about, it seems like spreading, but as you will see when we get to the misperformative aspect of fluid states, it was not just spreading of performance studies, but maybe even questioning, challenging performance studies, and who knows, maybe even ending it, destroying it. We'll see how it will end. Fluid States Performances of Unknowing is a year-long, globally dispersed and cross-cultural event which resists the prerogatives, politics, and hierarchies of centralized and corporatized conferences, festivals, and organizations in culture and arts, humanities, and social sciences. Fluid States Performances of Unknowing is a joint project of Performance Studies International and numerous partner organizations across Africa, Europe, America, Asia, Australia, and the Pacific. Universities, cultural centers, museums, and other state or local institutions, NGOs, and companies. Throughout 2015, 15 regional research clusters are staged in diverse but interconnected locations and regions outside or on the margins of the PSI traditional, which was US and UK geography. It's 15 locations, 14 countries. In Canada, we had that was the only country where we actually had 2 Fluid States events. One was organized by Amelia Jones in Montreal, on Trans Montreal, and the other one in Regina in the province of Saskatchewan, on the indigenous cultures. Let's call it like that. Called Performing Turtle Islands. Other clusters, or as we call them, islands, took place in all, well, you could see actually on the right side in all of those locations, from Panama City, Addis Ababa, New Delhi, all the way to Melbourne, which is where we had an event on performing mobilities just a week ago. That's why I was there. Actually, that's why I'm here, because I'm on my way back home from Melbourne. And then it's also in a couple of weeks we'll have a cluster, a fluid states cluster in Manila in the Philippines, and we'll conclude in December in Beirut, hopefully, because of the location. One of the mainsprings of the Fluid States project is to follow, as Rustam Barucha would say, a trajectory from global concerns to local issues and problems, from intercultural and international to intracultural and intra-regional problems, practices and prospects. More than simply a series of conferences or festivals, Fluid States Performances of Unknowing is a multiple, hybrid and collaborative project. It invites and enables encounters between academics, artists and activists, again, emerging and established communities and organizations, that's important, in order to research interweaving or contesting cultures and the ecologies of these cultures' performances. Fluid States Performances of Unknowing is not envisioned as a global and all-inclusive theme, but a permeable frame exposed to manifold responses and challenges. Each regional cluster, as co-organizers, has developed distinctive themes generated through the specific environmental, social, cultural, and political circumstances of their locality. Now, if I can just show you a little video. It's a little bit too long, so it won't last all. We won't play the whole of it. But okay, let's see what's happening here. Okay. So what we organized actually in 2014 was a gathering of all of the organizers in the city of Rijeka, which is a Mediterranean city, Adriatic city in the North Adriatic, in Croatia. That is actually where the theater that I'm now co-running is based. And what we organized was a project called Zooming Fluid States, a sort of introduction into fluid states, the only event where we actually had representatives of almost all of the 15 clusters that are taking place now throughout 2015 around the world, and asked them to think of create interventions on the breakwater of the port of Rijeka. So as I will be, just saying a few more things about fluid states in general, I'd like to, just whenever you are interested in that, pay attention to how it looked there. We won't use the sound this time, even though we have it. Because I have to say some things, and you can anyway explore all that on the website, on the Fluid States website, which is called The Log. Okay, that's the city of Rijeka, the port of Rijeka. Clearly, the whole project has actually two themes. Sometimes it's routinely just called Fluid States, but actually it's Fluid States Performances of Unknowing. Both of those titles are equally significant. Why Fluid States? The map of the world is usually perceived as an arrangement of continents dominated by the land and defined territories, terra firma, and borders. But what if we undertake a perceptive and conceptual reversal and replace continents with seas and place oceans such as the Pacific in the center instead of Europe? What if we replace the earth with water, solid states with fluid ones? How can such a shift or turn influence our understanding and performance of knowledge, of art and identity? Rather than defining global regions through the received cartographic flatlands of continents and nations, fluid states are assembled around the more fluid and shifting oceanic grounds of the seas that separate and bind territorial margins, the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Arctic, and Southern Oceans, as well as subsidiary bodies of water such as the Mediterranean, Caribbean, and South China Seas, and connecting bodies of water such as the Panama Canal and St. Lawrence Seaway. Performances of Unknowing as the second title. How do we perform what we assume we know? How do we respond to and become responsible towards the particularities of the local, cultural, historical, ideological, social, and political conditions of others' performances, as well as of our own? In what way is the unknown implied within the knowledge system, albeit isolated on its margins or excluded from its sites, institutions, and market? Is it conditioned by difference, specificity, complexity, locality, and liminality, or does it carry its own unknown logics beyond the relational and potentially always colonized idea of the other? Fluid states enact performances of unknowing rather than renditions of the known within dominant social and ideological paradigms, or indeed colonialist ideas of the unknown. Fluid states rely on locally situated formats and strategies to encounter and convey performances of unknowing, as opposed to the sanctioned systems of knowledge, their universal claims, and imperial politics. What we try to do is actually also not just have those 15 events, or as we call them, islands, very much correlated to the oceanic metaphorics that is behind the whole project, was also to develop a dramaturgy that was connecting them, that was interconnecting those independent local clusters. That dramaturgy consists of 4 structural elements: vessel, island, vessel, dock, and the log. This is actually the website, which is called the log. But it's quite complex now to get into details of the dramaturgy. Again, something that we can talk about tomorrow, or that you can also explore on your own on the Fluid States website. Okay. One, however, crucial and critical moment in the whole envisioning and development of Fluid States project was also to accept that things normally do not work as we plan they should, and many of the local organizers, or as we hoped they would, many of the local organizers had to deal with all kinds of specific local situations that prevented them to materialize their original ideas about the local clusters. And we all faced that, from Amelia to almost everybody else around. In Copenhagen, I don't know whether you were there, for the Copenhagen, you were still already here. Which is why, for that project as well, the concept of misperformance was crucial. Possible dissonances, storms and traumas of encounter, failures to launch or dock the vessel are not negated but negotiated through 2015, problematized and embraced by the Fluid States dramaturgy. Political, economic, social and cultural, as well as ecological realities of respective localities will undoubtedly affect the actual unfolding of the project, actually have already affected. Its dramaturgy does not evade misperformances, but coalesce with their potentiality. Eventually, the fluidity of our states might well petrify when tackling tragedies caused by war or natural disaster. The next and the final part of my presentation should actually start with some sort of transition, transition in between from global to the local, from fluid to the solid state, so to say. And as I was especially talking about a conference in 2009, I actually had to remind myself what the conference was actually about, and I was therefore also reading from some of my earlier presentations. In the final part, which is also the current stage of my curatorial, let's call them challenges, I will of course more really talk than read, and in the final 10 minutes I would like to also talk about fluid states from critical perspective, but the criticism will come out of the third curatorial challenge that I'm dealing with. So just for you, of course, to be aware of is that fluid states are an ongoing project. It is actually approaching its closure, at least in 2015. Some sort of follow-up is expected next year at the PSI conference in Melbourne. That's 2016 in July. Oh, that's even so. Even in the port of Rijeka, we had an artist diving into the port and planting little objects in the bottom of the port. So that's stuff that we have been doing there. Representing his own cluster that was to take place later in 2015 in Bahamas. What has proved to be really the case, and something that we have expected when envisioning and designing performance studies, fluid states performances of unknowing project, was the imperative of the local. All kinds of specific problems, issues, and concerns that, of course, all local organizers were aware of when preparing for that event. How did they actually affect the realization of their project, and how at some point it was obvious that local situations, local contexts and concerns have become more important, or at least more pressing for the local organizers than any kind of global connections. So as the local side of Fluid States project is a sort of developing and progressing wonderfully with so far 13 of exceptional events globally, and their interconnections are going through all kinds of problems, or as we could call them, misperformances. I could talk about that more tomorrow, but the reason is probably because at one point it became clear to all of us, including myself, that the imperative of the local is something that would probably be, if we decide to follow it, more true to the performances of unknowing than to the fluid states as its first title. And here I'd like to actually refer to Amelia, who, when I approached her for the first time and asked her whether she would like to be part of the project, and then I told her that actually it's a project on fluid states, her criticism was immediate. What kind of concept is that romantic concept of fluid states? Fluid states is something that we have been through, at least theoretically, over 80s and 90s, but how could that romanticism actually fit into the current and real world? And did we actually come to the point when we should talk about the solid states in case of fluid states? And in my case, and here I'll be slowly transitioning to the presentation of the theater business that I'm involved with, this concept of solid state as opposed to the fluid states is at least a double, or should I say ambivalent concept. So let's just end the talk about the fluid states and presentation of clusters with this one, which was a performance, which was an intervention on the top of the breakwater that actually ended that miniature fluid states project in that city on the port of Rijeka. So, okay, we are done with this, we're done with that. So as I know that tomorrow we'll have a chance to talk more, if you are okay that I just take another 5, 10 maybe minutes, because this is now going to be something completely different. So, okay, here we go. Can you see? Yes. So the main challenge was of fluid states, as it proved to be through 2015, was springing from two critical points. How to, or the question, how to actually approach the local and its distinct knowledges or performances of knowing. To travel, to visit and research the distinct islands and learn how to perform the unknowing, that could certainly be one of the ways. That would mean you should become a traveling artist, a role which goes with economic and related cultural political privileges as well as responsibilities. Alternatively, you could virtually travel through the log. That's how we call the performance Fluid States website, the log. My specific position in that project as its director and dramaturg was kind of uncomfortable. You know, whenever I was announcing and presenting the project through 2014 and 2013, the main question was always, will you go to see all of them? Will you travel to all of those places? And then now, as it is unfolding, the main question is, have you been to all of the places? Have you been to all of those localities? To me, it was those questions at one point turned to be problematic ethically, politically, and also ecologically and economically. To think of, you know, all of the funds I would have to have backing me to travel to all those places, and actually, what would that mean? What kind of some kind of colonial catalog would I be able to develop, saying, I've been to all those places. This is what happened here, this is what happened there. How could I ever claim that I actually managed to absorb all that was happening there? And wouldn't that be some kind of betrayal of the concept or the theme performances of unknowing, which in the end of the day are those performances that face us with the moment when we have to accept that there are certain things that we will never be able to know, which are so specifically cultural, local, historical, even traditional, that we can hardly imagine a mind that would be able to really go into the solidity of that apparent fluidity. So what I decided at one point was actually to turn to the local, to shift from traveling to the stationary performer, or rather dramaturg, intensively mobile but within my own intra-cultural environment, aware that there is, of course, a risk that you might end up trapped in a particular locality. Nevertheless, the challenge was tempting, even compelling. How to shift things in your own local community. That was actually the main reason why I accepted the invitation last September in 2014, just around that Zooming Fluid States Festival, all the sequence of interventions on the breakwater, the port of Rijeka. I accepted the invitation to become the head dramaturg, but also co-general manager of the Croatian National Theatre in the city of Rijeka, and that's the building. It's a proper theatre, not just a theatre, but a national theatre that consists of 4 different ensembles: drama in Italian, Croatian, ballet, and opera. And I'm actually also director of the opera company in that theatre. So by night, and this is the ceiling. On the ceiling of that theatre we have paintings painted by Gustav Klimt, nonetheless. And this is what I would like to talk to you about now. So what did we do in the theatre? And with the attempt to shift the theatre and to misperform to the point that we reach the moment when let's reach the moment at the end of this presentation. We will hear about that. So we started on the Independence Day of Croatia which is why it says we congratulate the Independence Day, we actually renamed the theater into the Croatian LGBT Theater. We put a rainbow flag on the theater instead of the Croatian flag, and we, instead of calling it Croatian National Theater, we renamed it into Croatian LGBT Theater, which was actually the first controversial provocation of the dominant narrative and the dominant, of course, ideology in a state that is predominantly conservative and Catholic, even though it is currently governed by the Social Democratic Party. The next project after renaming it was the trilogy on Croatian fascism. And what I'd like to do now is actually, or we could leave that actually for tomorrow. I could show you some of the clips from that performance or production of the trilogy on Croatian fascism. Of course, it had 3 parts, it otherwise would not be called a trilogy. This is the first part, the Bakaj. In front of the theater, you could see 4 soldiers from the Croatian so-called homeland war hanging in between the pillars, neo-Renaissance pillars of the front of the theater, and carrying Croatian flags. This is one of the scenes from that performance, the trilogy on Croatian fascism. As you can see, here we are quoting not Lady Gaga but Carolee Schneemann, and a number of other most prominent performance artists, but in the theatrical context. This is a scene that refers to the genocide in Srebrenica. That's the 3rd part of the trilogy, taking place inside the building with a pile of bodies on the table, and a little girl, Serbian girl, who was killed in the beginning of the 90s. Her name was Aleksandra Zec, and the auditorium of the National Theater in the back. So these are not all, but just a list of some of the main or the crucial shifts that we actually misperformed in the context of Croatian National Theater, which led up to an online campaign, actually Facebook campaign, against everything that we were doing at the theater, even though we have been parallel to all this producing operas, ballets, including the Nutcracker. However, what was the most provocative were those renamings of the theater, and also the trilogy on Croatian fascism. So, believe it or not, a Facebook group was initiated called Fire Frljić and Blazevic. So Frljić is a theater director who is sitting right beside me, and who is the general manager of the theater and my partner in this business. That whole campaign started for almost 10 months. In 10 months, we kept printing Facebook posts of those that were around 1,000 people that were part of that campaign. And we ended up with a book of 600 pages, densely written posts, copied posts of hate speech against us. That, of course, inspired us at the beginning of the summer festival that we are also organizing to create and organize a performance piece called Fire Frljić and Blazevic. We the setup was a table in front of the theater. You could get the idea of it here. Okay, in front of the theater. And we also, on the other table, we offered tomatoes, rocks, and guns for those who wanted to act against us. So those were real, of course, blocked guns. Again, in reference to Marina Abramovic, not because I'm Marin, she is Marina, but because, of course, we as performance studies people normally restage performances of other people. This is not just that. Anyway, the whole thing escalated, but seriously escalated. As you could see, one of the veterans of war who gathered around the theater. This was the stage, this was the whole setting, and you could see there were like some 200 people who were our supporters, but behind them is some 20 of them who were constantly trying to stop the performance. And let's just, I'm sorry. Okay, let's just see how it was. Okay. The guy grabbed the rock. Another veteran were tracking me and explaining me why we doing such a terrible, disrespectful thing against the war in Croatia. So I totally forgot how, I was totally shocked, I guess, because when you don't know how it is going to end, this is the only way, I guess, how I react to it. But the guy even threw the rock on the table, and only when looking at that video, I realized that I actually picked up the rock and just put it on the table. You won't see the moment when I was hit by an egg, but what I would like you to see is how even more serious it got at this image. Okay, so that's a literal fight between the nationalists or neo-fascists and a guy. You will see more here. The guy with a gun, then that guy that threw a rock on the table, who actually attacked a local head of the Department for Culture at the city of Rijeka, and then this other guy who was actually the only one. There were a couple of people that stood up in our defense, but the most active one was actually a guy who, I don't know how he found himself there, but an American. Who else would it be? So I call this in this video American intervention.
I would feel it's intended for. They want to create a reaction. And they said something, a reaction was given, and I disagreed with the way that reaction was demonstrated. I'm fine with people yelling out in the back and catcalling and doing all that. I disagreed with anybody physically harming someone.
Behind it, you can see a poster for the trilogy of fascism.
I could see it was there, and anytime when they were throwing the eggs, they were definitely throwing with intent. I mean, they weren't intending to kill, that's not their plan. They were intending to injure. And there was a part of me that when it started, I was a little frustrated that no one else had stood up. But also I understand, I mean, it's something that this community has been through war. I've never been through war. I've never been through the fear of death.
So it goes on, but trust me, believe me, crossed my heart, that was not staged. We didn't know even that he was American when we, went into that group of nationalists, stopping them to throw eggs on us. Only later we realized he doesn't even speak Croatian. He was an American. It was not a train, but there was an American to save us. Now, the final project was the project called The Other War, and it was done in response to the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the battle called Storm. And that battle was the turning point in the war, the so-called Homeland War, where Croatia was defending itself from the occupation of the Serbian army that that was the ally and supporter of the local Serbian minorities. It's a very complex story. But I think it's of course that in the not dominant narrative, that battle called the Storm was something that we were and still are supposed only to celebrate. No counter voices were allowed. I'm talking about a general cultural mentality there. I'm not talking about, for example, the current politics, which actually did question things that happened during that battle and also during the war, including some war crimes. The other war was actually a peace that involved 5 women from of different nationalities, and those 5 women of different nationalities, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, were actually sharing with the audience in the theater their own experience of the war, which was of course quite different from the dominant narrative about the war. Here you could see them, and this is what was happening in front of the theater. So in front of the theater we had some 150 nationalists and neo-fascists protesting against what was happening inside the theater, to the point that they literally blocked the doors into and out of the theater, shouting all kinds of nationalistic threats to people that managed to get in the theater. At one point, the whole situation escalated so that we had to have the intervention of the seriously armed special police forces that protected the theater and people that were inside. When I talked about in the beginning, in the transition to this part of my final part of my talk, about the situation that you sometimes might find yourself trapped in the locality and in the local imperative, that is exactly what we felt, but really physically. Because at one point, even the police officer came to me and asked me, what are we going to do? Because we were supposed, at the end of that performance piece, we were supposed to let people out of the theater, and there they were, waiting for us, some 300 people trapped, blocked in the theater building. The only way to get people out from the theater was this. So the special police forces, they had to form a cordon at the door, at the exit of the theater, so that the people would be able to get out from the theater, as you could see. Some of the that seemed to be a safe situation, quite solid state protecting us who questioned the fluidity of national identity in that building. But that was only in front of the theater. Some 500 meters away from the theater, some of the journalists, some of the people that were part of that were actually attacked, physically attacked. Some windows were broken at the theater, and that is just to give you the idea how intense it was. So the conclusion is actually, again totally misperformative. It's what happened just 10 days ago, because that intensity of controversial, provocative projects that are questioning the dominant nationalistic narrative is ongoing. And just some 10 days ago, the most likely next prime minister, who is the leader of the nationalistic party that is recently manifesting also some neo-fascist interests or ideas, but definitely also fascist rhetorics, and we have the elections in 3 weeks' time. He came to the city of Rijeka, which is governed by the Social Democratic Party, and that is for like past 25 years. It's called Red Rijeka, like Bologna in Italy. So locally, we seem to be quite safe, but the prospect, most likely prime minister at the rally, he actually screamed against the management of the theater, threatening, saying in the first place that theater is no longer a cultural institution, that it is no longer a Croatian cultural institution, and that if he is elected, and his party would get into power, that he would actually be taking care of us. That was the expression. I will take care of the situation, whatever that means. So, of course, it was quite, a shocking situation that someone who is most likely going to be the next prime minister is even thinking of that kind of rhetoric, let alone actually delivering it. At that time, when he gave that speech, which of course inspired or encouraged the war cry on the side of several thousand of people that gathered at the rally, at that time we were actually producing a new performance, ballet performance in our theater. And the title of that performance is Sex. So what we did in response to this speech of that most likely prime minister is this. His name is Karamarko. So we actually invited him, and what it says here, the transcript says Karamarko, that's his name. Come for sex. So we actually publicly at the front of the theater, we invited him to come to the theater for sex. Of course, in that sense, also provoking the dominant homophobic discourse in the country, Catholic discourse, conservative, nationalistic, and fascist. So, still we are trapped in the theater, and next time I come here, I'll be able to tell you how it all ended. Sorry for being too long, but I thought that one thing I know now, that if I want to talk about all three of the projects, it's too long.
Oh, it's pretty riveting. Can I ask a question to start? I mean,
sure.
We have a few minutes to, for those of us who won't be at the seminar. It seems really clear to me what this last project is doing. I mean, just by the reactions, you're actually mattering in some really profound way, which is something that it's a lot harder to do in giant, like, capitalist countries like the U.S. Because you can basically do anything here and no one will care. But I'm wondering what to go back to the fluid states and my annoyance with your Deleuzian evidence, and the misperformance. What exactly, I mean, could you talk about what you hope to attain by this kind of research or this kind of project where you're soliciting or allowing for misperformance or fluidity, or, because, I mean, I love the idea of it as an intellectual concept. I've never heard you actually extensively describe Zagreb and the shifts. But what did you hope to get out of that, and did it happen?
And did it happen, right?
Yeah, and did it happen? And similarly with fluids.
You mean the fluid states, right?
Well,
or the shifts program.
Kind of the misperformance idea, the fluidity idea, which you connected so nicely.
So it's because we are in the art school, right? So it's in the context of an art school, it's not a crime to say that sometimes, even though you have an idea, you do not necessarily have a clear strategy how to actually develop that idea, right? If you think of a concept, you could theorize around it, but sometimes you don't even know how to theorize at the moment when it happens, when you have an idea of what to do. Let alone to develop the strategy how to materialize that concept. And sometimes it's, I don't want to mystify around the intuition, but it has something to do also sometimes with intuition. Of course, that intuition has to be backed with thorough thinking, but also with a readiness for risk. And when we started 2015, when we started 15th conference in Zagreb, which was in 2009, but also Fluid States 2015, as much as we were trying to be as precise as possible about the overall idea of the project and actually how to materialize it, I always thought that it's important that some things should be left open. And that in the process of doing it, you just have to be ready to adapt to whatever was happening in the same time, having a kind of clear idea of what it could be and what it won't be, and to try somehow to, you know, dramaturgically shift in between the two. It's a kind of weird combination of taking risk and being relaxed about the risk, somehow trusting the general concept that you have about the project, but also allowing all kinds of threats to the realization of that project. So at the conference in Zagreb, we had this clear idea of what shifts could be, but how to actually curate the shifts, how to put them together, it's something that came along as it was developing. And the concept of shifting dramaturgy I didn't develop before the conference, but only after I actually saw how it worked or didn't work. Of course, people that were there at the event, they were all very excited about it. They thought it was great, but I knew that it was falling apart all the time. Being a curator means at least two things. One, to be prepared that things will probably not work as you planned, no matter how strict and rigorous you are about whatever you are curating. And another thing is never to show that to others. You just have to keep pretending it's all exactly as I planned it should be, even though some things are not happening, but we anticipate that they're not going to happen. We actually plan them so they do not happen. Then, of course, when we get to the point of reflecting and theorizing about a project, then you can admit that things did not work. That is how I invented this concept of shifting. That my notion of shifting dramaturgy, right? Just it was a kind of post-performance invention after I realized how we tried what we wanted, what we tried, but what we didn't make, and how misperformance in the end started to be not just thematized by the conference, but also embodied by the conference. With fluid states, I'm still, because it's an ongoing project, so I'm still trying to see what was the problem, why things did not work as they planned, and some things, of course, locally, those clusters or events were just, most of them were amazing. And if you look at the log and read through the reports, through the correspondences that people are sharing with us, even though with a certain delay, you could see that the quality of program that was created locally is in all of the cases locally important, because how can you say it's not important for that locality, but also in many cases it's internationally really relevant. And I think that in the years to come, with a number of publications that will come out in that project, it will become more evident. As for me, it was this kind of really ambivalent process through the whole 2015, in between, on one hand, monitoring what was happening globally, and trying to deal with locally quite extreme situations, even through a misperformative, ironic lens, as this one has come over for sex that he was invited. One last thing about fluid states, in response to your question, is that even though there is a quite worked out dramaturgy of the fluid states project, which connects various events around the world, and I'll be happy to talk about that more tomorrow. My main challenge was actually not to impose any of those things to the local organizers as if they have to connect or as if they have to happen. Even though it threatened, and it's still threatening, the solidity of that dramaturgy. I just thought that at some point you have to, put people in touch, which is what we did in the first place, remind them once or remind them twice, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. let's see what comes out of that doesn't work. And that's what I'm still investigating or researching. Yeah.
Thanks. I have so many questions, but time is running. I guess I'm interested in this the notion of unknowing. When I took notes, I wrote unowning instead.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking about that in terms of also shifts, because now I've been following, I guess I've been to 6 PSIs over the last year. I missed Saga, unfortunately. But so I kind of follow these shifts, and it certainly shifted my way of thinking, and I ended up giving like papers in the men's bathroom and places I didn't know I would at least do that kind of things in. But my question is more in terms of like, you know, for instance, last year in Shanghai, there was this.
Was it last year?
Last summer.
Last
and the PSI in Shanghai was to me like a very shift in terms of how that kind of conference was. It was very kind of shifting in, not necessarily back to, but to a very kind of conservative model of academic. So like the shifts were gone, and it was very kind of divided. But in terms of that, I'm thinking about unknowing and unowning. Because there also was very antagonistic in terms of owning a notion of performance studies. Like the director of the Shanghai school had like he really wanted to own his model of what performance is. Which ended up on
social performance studies.
Yes, which ended up on the last day to be an extremely antagonistic event with some of his younger students and him,
accusing him of.
Which was like really intense. So but I'm interested in now, like when this is fluid states, when there's so many geographies, what kind of performing is being like unknown or being unowned? Are there like, what does that do to PSI as an organization? Because last year it felt really like we had a kind of like a clash of civilizations model happening in that space, where it was like the Western towards, like it was really kind of a crash in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm wondering, in terms of kind of what kind of unlearning, unknowing, owning of performance happens when you spread it out like that.
Yeah, well, I guess the first unknown thing is what is going to be the future of PSI. Even though the PSI people are not even thinking about that. But that's because they're missing one. They're trying to skip the fact that something quite disappointing happened throughout 2015, and that is that even though there was this project Fluid States which gathered hundreds of people around the world in their own local communities, but the usual international PSI crowd almost completely ignored the project. So there were never more people, and we'll end up with some 2,000 people around the world. You know, in Addis Abeba, in Ethiopia, there were like 20,000 people that gathered at a festival, and Fluid States were part of the festival. In the same time, if you look at the list of participants, all of those people that we normally meet at PSI conferences are not there or will not be there. So I'm really curious what will happen next year, and that's an unknown thing to start with to me. Next year when we reconvene in Melbourne, and when there will be a whole day devoted to Fluid States, how are we going to respond to that? Because the idea of the project was actually to challenge those dominant communities and dominant narratives within not just Performance Studies International. That's less important. It's just a network. Network will always survive, but the main question is because there are of course institutional, commercial, marketing, trade and other interests that keep it solid enough to survive. But there is the question of performance studies in general, and you might have noticed that at one point I sort of provocatively stressed that I'm not really sure whether this whole concept of collaborative approach to practice and theory is still relevant to performance studies as a paradigm, and especially in the States, and especially at the main performance studies departments in the States where the whole paradigm was initiated. And could we maybe, or should we maybe, accept the fact that the true performance studies, or at least the performance studies that is respectful to, or performance research that is respectful to the original idea of performance studies is now actually happening elsewhere, in those localities around the world that don't even bother whether the events that they're organized are called performance studies events, whether it's called performance research, and whether it's called performance. But it is clearly a research about practices that have something in common. They have different background, they have different cultures, but they still have some common formalities, which are not irrelevant, because it's the form sometimes, so it's the dramaturgy sometimes that connects us, even though it is about different content. So, if that could be ever concluded, but we were in a situation when, for example, Ethiopian cluster had to be postponed because it became politically dangerous for the organizers to even think about or relate to a project called Fluid State, because of the solidity of that state, which was authoritarian. In other cases, like for example what we are dealing with, which is why it came to me when I was thinking about talking about fluid states in Melbourne, and then I remembered what Amelia was sort of provoking me about this concept of solid. I realized that a solid state, when we talk about it literally about a state, is actually an ambivalent concept. On one hand, it could mean an authoritarian and totalitarian state, but on the other hand, it could mean a state that protects, whose task is actually to protect you to be fluid. And those police forces that actually they prevented a serious violence because they acted as a solid state force. So the unknown remains to be things that we discover about performance studies in general, or about those localities through the project. But the main thing which should, at least that's probably the only one ideology I have about fluid states, is that at one point you have to accept that there are performances that will remain unknown to us, and that the main respect, that the main or the only approach that we should have about those performances is actually a respect towards its specificity and our incapacity to really know about them. That's maybe mystifying about things.
No, I think that what was so challenging for me working on fluid studies was being fluid. I think it's about what you allowed people to do was actually take a risk, like you said. And I had to deal with people who wanted to do all this extremely fluid stuff, which I still think wouldn't have been a great idea, a lot of it. And it was very inchoate and kind of not really clearly articulated or theorized. But, I had to see what that was like. And coming from art history, where everything is much more specified and concrete and really has the opposite problem of fetishizing everything and turning it into an object. It was really challenging and interesting and valuable. So I think you did create an amazingly flexible framework. I also want to publicly thank you for being so relaxed, because it was Marin saying, numerous times, like, who cares? Like, it's fun. Like, if those people, end up doing some weird thing, or if everybody drops out and you have to start again. And that, I was not used to working with someone who had, like, such incredibly assertive and strong creative interest, but also just had the ability to say, it'll be fine. Whatever happens will be interesting. It doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be that.
That's very much about the dramaturgy, which is something I'd be happy to talk with you about. But it's a kind of practice that allows that when it is done in a proper way. But there is a structure. You can always get back to that structure, but you can also divert from it in whatever way you think you can. But it's always there, even when you are not aware of it. But it's one of the phrases that we kept saying was "do what is doable."
Yeah.
That's one thing which is important. And another thing is that even though it is a large-scale project with hundreds of people involved, it's the low-budget project. On the global level,
no money whatsoever.
on the global level, it was like $10,000 that were invested globally in that project for some of the initial travels, which is nothing for a project like that. Of course, locally, each of those.
By the way, McGill just asked me if PSI could give them some money because they went over budget.
$200. Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I'm not going to look at your questions. But
Well, they have tomorrow,
yeah,
and we should break pretty soon.
yeah, but I was just like, curious to return to the things we've seen, like your final project, in terms of
it's
also
not final.
No, like the final you presented.
But currently it is.
Like a couple of like clarifications. Like one, like the national, like the turning of from the national theater to the LGBT theater, did that also involve something on the inside, or was that more like a gesture of naming only?
It was a gesture of naming because on that day the theater did not work.
Yeah,
it
okay.
was Independence Day, a public holiday.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, through the year we have all kinds of projects, and we are very outspoken about those issues, to the point that, you know, we even sort of, as I said, we provoked that guy, inviting him there for sex, right?
And but in relation to that, I'm just thinking about dramaturgy, because I guess, of course, using the front of the theater as like not as well as a stage in a certain way, also I guess invites a certain kind of public, like, you know, dramaturgy of the public, and I guess one knows after different kinds of events that there will be that mob of neo-fascists. And I'm thinking of like how do you work with that? Like, for instance, in the performance where you're reading or sitting there with a Abramovich-ish table with like there is also dramaturgy there that is playing and inviting a certain kind of antagonist.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
And I'm just curious of how do you think about that? Because I guess, as you say, this one guy that pops in and defends you, and he's being maybe beaten, or like, what do you think about? How do we think about misperformance then, or dramaturgy then? Because
the reason I said it's a very good question is because, and also maybe the way to conclude this part of my working with you here is that, frankly, we didn't even anticipate it's going to be so aggressive. The original idea was that we would just be there, sitting and reading, and people will be passing by. And some of them will stop, look at the installation, like tomatoes, and because it's a theater, so that's tomatoes, right? And it's no other reasons. And it's the rocks. You know, it's going to be more like an installation, dynamic installation. People will come and go. But then, when we got out from the theater, then we realized like 200 people already sitting there and waiting for us. So that was the first shock. What does that mean? I mean, are we really that important that they would all gather around the theater, of course, observing what is going to happen? So that, but then, of course, you feel comfortable because you recognize the faces and you realize, okay, they are friends. But then you realize there were those outside the circle of trust, so to say. And those were people that there was absolutely no way we could control what they were doing. There was no way. The whole performance lasted for 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes. Soon after it started, like 15 minutes after it started, they started to interfere. We were reading, we were constantly reading, they were constantly shouting, constantly screaming at us, until the point where they started to throw eggs. Then they felt encouraged by the fact that there was no police. We didn't want the police for that event, because that would be, against the whole idea. And it was not actually until that guy intervened, that's also really interesting, that they got enough courage to come in front of us, to the front stage. And that was actually when they started to, approach to us and shout at us. No one actually really, I was hit by an egg, And that was already when everything escalated. We had a guy, like some kind of bodyguard, who was there all the time, because sometimes we have to walk around the city with the bodyguards. Even though the majority of the people really support us, and you get into the supermarket or the grocery or the restaurant, they buy you a drink or dinner or whatever, but you know, those 1,000 people in the city are enough to actually cause trouble to all of us. Anyway, what I want to say is that at one moment, when it started to escalate, I really didn't know how to end it. And that was the moment of risk, the unknown, and the potential danger of misperformance. When you really don't know how to end it, you cannot, because it started to be so aggressive and violent that you now realize, okay, if we now leave and escape, that would be wrong. If we call the police, that would be wrong. If we ask for 5 minutes break to, you know, just to try to think how to end it, that would also be wrong. And then, in typical misperformative or misperformance way, I was hit by an egg. You know, I felt like this, went down my. I think I actually had this. No, I had the red one. The red one, the red T-shirt says "Theater to the People," right? And then, you know, it happens to you as a moment of, you know, inspiration or something. When everything was falling apart and I was hit by the egg, I stood up. Instead of shouting at them who hit me with that egg, I just took the mic again and continued reading. And that's actually on the recording. That was the moment when the audience stood up and started to applaud to us. And that was the moment when I said to Oliver, who was, now that's the moment, now we should end it. During the applause. And then he just, you know, said a few words as a closure. But it happened. There were moments when I really didn't know what to do with it. Now we know that it's time to end it.
Yeah.